Hello, I'm Dr. Harriet Fraad.
And I'm Juliana Forlano, here with our podcast, Capitalism Hits Home.
This is a show about the intersection of capitalism, class analysis, gender, race, and our personal lives.
We aim to educate and activate and even hopefully alleviate some of the burdens we all experience living in a capitalist USA.
We hope that this program serves you. And of course, we want suggestions of how it could serve you better, or lots of praise if it served you already. And today, we will talk about the empty nest, which is either empty or very full these days, the effect of capitalism on young adults and their families.
We'll also be getting to the headlines in a moment. But right now, we thought we'd briefly share with you how capitalism has hit us at home since last week. I'm going to start this time, Harriet, if you don't mind.
Sure.
This is sort of capitalism and the intersection of politics, but we're coming up on Halloween. It is the fall, and we were going to go pumpkin picking with my 4.5-year-old daughter and some of her friends and friends' parents. And as my husband drove past the pumpkin patch farm, he noticed a giant Trump sign on the front of the farm. And so we had to make a decision. Do we go and support with our money a business that is supporting fascism? Or do we get our pumpkins elsewhere? And I did a thing that I thought was important, which is I said to the rest of the families that the farm has a Trump sign on it, and I don't feel comfortable going for two reasons. One, again, I don't want to financially support an organization that is financially supporting something that I think is just really going to be terrible for, all concerned. And two, the Trump people are not wearing masks, Harriet. They're going to rallies with no masks with a president who has COVID. So it seems like if they're not, the sign Trump means fascism, racism, and also we don't necessarily care about your health. So it was just struck me how much politics and capitalism has trickled down into really all of everything that's personal in our lives. And something about the Trump pumpkin patch was something I just thought I'd share.
Well, I can see that. This week, I'm so enthralled by the statements about Trump and the creativity of people, including the great big pumpkin of Trump that says, orange on the outside, hollow on the inside. Donald Trump.
Yes.
So,
yes. Well, it's so interesting because I'm sure they didn't create that for cash. They just created it out of the creative spirit. So on some level, whoever made this piece of pumpkin artwork and got it all over the internet, that's the impulse that we're trying to free, right? If there's no capitalist drive to everything we do, our creative impulse is more liberated.
It sure is, and it's everywhere. The internet is full of creativity. And then there are also news stories I wanted to share. The one that caught my eye the most was that bankers are supporting Biden. Now,
yes.
they feel very confident in him. He certainly delivered them in his state of Delaware. And I should say that in the news was a statement that Lloyd Blankfein, huge financial bigwig and former CEO of Goldman Sachs, let the Democratic National Committee know that he and his ilk would not support any Democrat if it were Bernie Sanders. And they listened too carefully. And gave 3-1.
I heard that even before Biden was the candidate, that contributions from individuals affiliated with the 6 largest lenders were almost, they were more than $900,000 for Biden and only just under $300,000 for Trump, which is so interesting because Trump touts the fact that he's done very well for the banks. And he has. I mean, these banks are making tons of money every, all of those
Minute.
checks that went out to each person from the government basically got given back to the banks via rent. So the banks are doing fine under Trump. What do you think makes the banks want to support Biden?
They're a little bit afraid of the extent of the out of control aspect of Trump's thugs, and also of all the people in the street. 15 million people marched for Black Lives Matter. And they
Wow.
are afraid of a disruptive element that might realize capitalism is a problem. And so they want things calmed down. They don't want things to get out of control. They don't want the Proud Boys beating people up. They want calm. They want business, business, business as usual.
They want you to quiet down while they rape you.
Exactly.
Is
and
that too
rob
much?
you.
Should I put a trigger warning on that one? I mean, really, though, they're not doing us any
while
favors.
They rob you. While they rob you. Certainly.
Exactly.
And cause
the
misery.
news story that caught my eye actually dovetails well with what you just said. As we talk here often, one of the things that we look for in terms of, revolution or change is are people taking to the streets, not just using the electoral levers of power as they can, but really taking to the streets. And this story came out today that climate justice advocates are working to get public banks around the world to treat government responses to the coronavirus crisis as an opportunity to coordinate what they're calling just recoveries from the ongoing public health and economic calamities that we're seeing everywhere. These activists are demonstrating, they're asking banks to facilitate transitions away from dirty energy to clean energy. They are trying to get these public banks to build the world they want, is what they said. And according to 350.org, there are a handful of institutions like the European Investment Bank, Swede Fund, and the French Development Agency who have in fact committed to diverting public money away from fossil fuels. These campaigners are saying that that's very good. It's not sufficient. And so they're pushing for more, arguing that public banks have to commit to harness resources in ways that disempower the oil and gas industry and the coal industry as well, and create that more egalitarian, sustainable world that benefits workers and communities and the environment. So I just think that these folks, I like to shine the spotlight on some of these news stories where people are actually agitating, activating. And so that's the one that really caught my eye this week, to get those banks, instead of supporting Biden to go back to fracking and business as usual, they want these public banks to, use this opportunity, this crisis point, as an opportunity to change to clean energy in a sustainable way of life.
And they really are related, because the banks prefer people to calmly give the banks their money rather than to be agitated and in the streets.
Right.
So they're voting for Biden.
Exactly.
Well, so
this is our time where we're transitioning to our main story for today. But before we do, I do want to thank everyone who has given via our Patreon page. We just kind of laid it on the table last week that we would like to do this podcast every week, and Harriet and I donate our time, and the group Democracy at Work is who brings this podcast to you. But they have given us 90 days to be able to make ourselves 90 days to make ourselves self-sustaining by contributions. They're supporting us until then, and we have to pay our the people
costs.
who get it out on the internet. We have to pay the editors. So I appreciate the folks who came out for our appeal last time and gave at patreon.com. Capitalism hits home. We still kind of have a long way to go. So if you do, I know it's very hard times, as we said before. So we are doing this as best we can as a public service But if you have a few dollars you can give on a recurring basis, monthly or whatever, that would really help to crowdfund this Capitalism Hits Home project that we so belovedly love, enjoy
Mhm.
creating for you. Harriet, do you wanna add something?
Yes, that's that $1 a week is wonderful. $4 a month. It's wonderful because it shows your commitment and we appreciate it. Because unfortunately, we are in a capitalist society and we don't have these opportunities free of charge. So free speech costs something, sadly. Please help.
I know, and I feel, you know, I almost it's I feel like everyone's trying to sell you something on the internet and it's starting
Yeah.
to rub me the wrong way. So I'm just
Mm.
asking that if you can go to patreon.com/capitalism hits home. And if you can't, just watch the show. We love
Yes, we
doing it
love
for
you.
you. And you can also share us with your friends who might have $4. Well, no, I'm kidding. You might just
Yeah.
sharing us, helping us get this kind of conversation into the mainstream conversation is what our goal is.
So please help. And we share a goal or you wouldn't be listening.
And with
Thanks.
that,
And
let's transition to the main long
yes.
story that for discussion. Last week, we discussed the impact of living in a culture steeped in and built upon lies. And we got a lot more lies since we even discussed it last
Yes,
week. We
we
talked about
did.
what that does to our mental health, our emotional health. Harriet gave us the history of one of the biggest lies in capitalism, that the inevitable naturalness of the nuclear family is the order of what's natural in families, instead of the fact that that particular structure was just a convenient way for capitalists of old to continue profiting off another's labor. But today we continue our discussion of capitalism's effect on the family. But this time we want to discuss this specific effect. There comes a time in every family's life cycle where the children leave the nest. Well, you can probably see where we're going with this. Capitalism has been affecting the healthy transition out of the nest for decades. And in this time of COVID, the negative effects are becoming more pronounced. First, Harriet, let's start the discussion with an idea of what a healthy situation and transition out of the nest would be in a healthy, just world. What would it look like? What
What
structures
it
could society have in place to facilitate this transition? Harriet?
Well, we have lots of examples that are helpful. The first one is we could look to Europe that has no tuition fees and public universities. So we could cut tuition at all state and city colleges that are four-year colleges or community colleges. That would help enormously. And then we could look to our own past. We wouldn't even have to look abroad. We could look to the 30s when FDR was responsible, I should say, because hundreds of thousands were in the streets demanding change, but he was responsible for the programs that hired 11 million Americans at good wages. The equivalent for today's population of America would be if we hired 22 million people at good jobs that were well paid to not only do things like build roads and build public transportation, which needs badly to be built, and new schools and smaller school pods so kids could learn at 3 or 4 kids each in a protected environment. We could pay for people to be hired as testers and test everyone. China had a few cases in one province. They had 9 million tests so that they could trace where it comes from and treat it immediately. Generally, they had no new cases, which is amazing since they're the most populous nation in the world, while we have 214,000 deaths and many millions of cases all the time. So we could do that, all of those things. We could hire 22 million Americans, and then young Americans would be transferred from their unemployment rate of almost 20%, 19.8% is the latest count. And so that they could leave home, they could believe in a future, they could have paid internships, and they could begin a life, which they can't now do. So, of
So
course, we
the
could do those things.
there's those structural things that a healthy society looks like. Um, but what does it look like in a or not but in addition, could you expound on what does it look like sort of the psychological dynamics of individuation at the point where you're becoming a young adult? What is that supposed to look like? How does the family support that? And what do young people need in order to fledge, I guess is a good word.
Well, what they need is they need chances to leave home, to find out who they are as separate from who they are in their parents' eyes, who they are in the world's eyes. They need to be able to achieve things they can be proud of. So they need jobs that are challenging, that are productive, so that they can see that they can be independent people, which is hard if 20% unemployment, even in science, technology, engineering, and math, are the case, that they could see a future and experiment. They could sexually experiment. You don't really want to bring your sex partners to your mom and dad's house.
Yeah.
Um, so
Little
that's,
repressive.
yeah, very repressive. And so that you could get a sense of who you are outside of your definition within a family. I mean, I didn't realize I was smart till I got to college.
Me neither.
And
I
that
thought
was
I was
great.
problematic because they weren't
Yeah,
used to someone who wanted to
yeah,
ask a lot of
right.
questions.
Exactly. And so that I found out that not only was I, I was already a professional dancer in high school, so I knew I was good at that, but I found out I had a wonderful mind and how exciting it was to learn stuff. The schools I went to were not exciting, starting with PS 81. Ugh. And yeah, public school 81 in the Bronx. And so I had a sense of myself. And my parents got a break from having us around, me and my sister,
Harriet, Harriet, can I make a comment about the PS? You said
please,
PS, what was it, 81?
81
Yes, so
in the
public
Bronx.
schools, that's a whole nother, hopefully we can have a whole nother conversation about that at another time. But the structure of public schools is really learn these things so that you can become a successful support to some capitalist endeavor. And it really just it crushes your soul and spirit. Not all of it, and I know a lot of our public school teachers do their best to encourage learning but under the structure right now it just seems a little, you know
Difficult.
it's a little backwards.
It's very backwards. And really, what I learned at PS 81 was that I should shut up and obey. That's what I learned. And I
That's
should
you hit it.
memorize things instead of figuring out. I remember the geography lesson. We had to color in different countries, different colors. I had no relationship to them at all. I didn't care. It's another thing to say to kids, look, if you were settling, where would you settle? What would you need in your life? Let's draw a map and see what nations have these things that humans need and where they might have settled. That would have been actually interesting. But we didn't do any of that. And
No,
I think young people need a challenge. And one of those challenges is to leave the person you were in your parents' eyes and go into the world and find your possibilities. And of course, parents need relief from supporting their children. There's a cartoon that I saw that was, I thought, quite telling, where the parents have their suitcases packed and their child is at the door, their adult child, and they say, "Oh my God, we were getting ready to move in with you."
I'm a parent, as you are, I know, and what parenthood and motherhood has asked of me is to be completely different than my own daughter asks me to be different than I would naturally find myself being. She requires a different kind of interaction. I don't know if all kids do. I only have the one. So, but I think when they leave, I would imagine that the parents can also go back to having identities that don't involve the role necessarily of mommy, daddy all the time kind of thing.
That's right. And they also don't have the sense of crushing responsibility. I mean, your daughter is fortunate you actually care what she needs. For most people, don't really
That's true.
get to articulate what they need because who cares? You're a burden anyway. Don't make it even worse,
Huh.
That the idea of then leaving home and finding out the person you can be outside of the glances of these two people with their own agendas. It's crucial. And for the parents, it's financially and emotionally liberating
So, what are
and
we facing now under
curtailed.
COVID and under this advanced late stage capitalism that we're in? Harriet and I had a brief discussion about this as we were preparing for the show yesterday. Harriet, why don't we had kind of two different angles? So, why don't you talk about what you see that the people are facing now in this current situation?
Well, I think they're facing the decline of the American empire. The doors that were opening for me as much older because we were the only surviving economy after World War II. So in the 50s, doors were opening. Now those doors are closing on young people's fingers, and it hurts. And there's a huge adjustment. And so that my reality was vastly different from the reality of a 20 to 24-year-old now. And that was a reality that didn't even require a college degree. My daughter wanted to be different from us and went out and became a bartender. She made more than I did. And she always got jobs because there were jobs. Even if they weren't your dream job, there were a job.
Mm-hmm.
And that's closed now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a vastly different thing.
And you were saying that yesterday that the kids are actually, because they can't find jobs, because college is unaffordable, and now colleges, some of them are closed and remote, and you're risking your life to go. Kids are stuck at home with their family, and it's distorting that individuation process. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, that what happens is that the person you are in your parents' eyes is not necessarily the one you want to be in your life. And they're constrained to that. And their habits are constrained. And there's a very important period for Americans in their 20s. People get married much later than they used to because they don't really see that they have a future until later, and now not at all. But they're at loss, and a lot of them become depressed. The suicide rate for young people is spiking. And so that there's a sense of hopelessness, and everyone needs hope and possibility to continue. Hope, possibility, and connection, and they're all impaired.
And my thought as we were talking was there's another problem with capitalism and what it does around individuation. And I'm taking this from a personal story. Instead of forcing you to stay home, it forces you to go far afield in order to,
Get a
be
job.
successful.
Yeah,
I grew up
right.
in upstate New York. It was part of kind of the buckle part of the Rust Belt, on the end of the Rust Belt. Um, and when NAFTA came in, sent all the jobs out out of the country.
Mexico.
All of the manufacturing in the area closed down. So not only were there no manufacturing jobs, which is where my family was working. My father worked in manufacturing. My mother worked for the state, working class individuals, and with a focus on education, getting your child to the next level, really trying to support us in that, with that sort of immigrant's dream that an education is the way out. And they sacrificed quite a bit so that my sister and I could have good educations. I am still burdened I'm almost ready to retire, and I'm still burdened with an enormous student loan, but we'll see what happens. We'll just keep,
Yes.
please make your contribution. No, I'm just kidding. We're not
Yeah,
taking.
that's right. It's a
Anyway,
lone fund.
in order to have the kind of job that was maybe a step beyond what the job my parents wanted me to have, a step beyond what they were able to achieve, I had to leave. So basically, I had to leave town. And so then fast forward a few years, I'm more settled into my career, went to college, etc. Have a child. I have no family structure to help with the child. And as you know, it does take a village. And your
It sure
friends might
does.
help, but they might not. And so
Absolutely.
and then we kind of rely on the society to maybe help us with preschool, but these things are not happening. They're not baked into the cake. And so there's like a crushing burden on people who have to go as far away as possible. I mean, you would think that to individuate, you could live in a general area where you could still access some of the support that a family or an extended family, or even the connections that your family has made in the area. For example, my mom worked for the state for all of these years. She had all of these coworkers who I would pass in the grocery store, and they'd ask how I was doing. It was just sort of a community there that I didn't have to go out and build on my own. And because of capitalism and the forces that drive it, that is really not available. I meet people from upstate New York all over the place. I rarely meet them in upstate New York because
Yes.
everyone has had to leave in order to have,
Yes.
a successful life. Sorry, Harriet, go. I'd love to hear your thoughts about
Well,
that.
jobs are so precarious that if one gets an opportunity, one goes. Typical of that is the runway. You can rent your clothes. There are furniture places where you can rent your furniture. You can rent artwork for your walls because you're going to be leaving. And the ideal of many young people, I've seen it in my clients, is to be able to pack everything in one car when they get a
Oh, I
job
had that.
and move across the country.
It was all futons
Because,
and foldable shelves for 20 years.
yes, because they had no faith that they could find a job, make something of themselves in that job, and have some security. Now there is no security. Even before the pandemic, there was very little. Now there's none. And for young people, things are much, much worse and worsening. 20%, 1 in 5 people who are between 20 and 24 years old can't find a job in spite of a college education or beyond, and in spite of being in what are supposed to be the guaranteed fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. So that individuation of being your own person, and also being your own person with supports. If you want to have a child, there are fewer public daycares now available, provided by our government, than were provided during World War II when they wanted women out to work. That's terrible. And we're the only country in the Western world who does this. And we're also the only one that isn't, where our capitalism isn't challenged by powerful socialist, communist, and green parties. So in Portugal, which has been ruled for the last 10 years or so by a coalition of the Green Party, the Communist Party, and the Socialist Party, they have marvelous addiction programs. They have wonderful childcare. They don't have to give us much in America. We don't have people challenging them.
So we started last week giving some suggestions on how to live through and what you can, maybe some techniques, tried and true, for how to live through some of the things that people are going through right now. And we got a lot of great feedback from you. And we understand you like that part of the show. So we're going to do that right now. Harriet, any thoughts for people who are either stuck at home at how to cope, for today, for these current times, or people who are stuck far away where they cannot take advantage of the support system that is there? No families are perfect, and some people run far away from their families for good reason. But for those people who, because of capitalism, have had to move far from home, what are your thoughts on how to live through these difficult situations?
Well, the first thing is to connect with other people, to understand that if you're terribly anxious and depressed, you're in the you're there right there with 87% of the population, that it isn't your failing. You're in a terrible situation. That's one. The other is, even if it's only remotely, connect and connect with whomever you can. If you have a new baby, connect with the people who are in your class at the natural childbirth. Be sure not to be isolated and alone. And there are supports, even if they're harder to access. They are out there, and find them.
I think that that advice goes even well for those folks who are, at home, at their parents' homes and feeling, hemmed in by the expectations, by the way their parents see them, just connecting outward to the best of their ability. And also, I encourage people to just remember again that this is hopefully and likely a time limited situation. It's not going to be this way forever. Things will pass. And one of the things that's helped me when I'm in situations where people are responding to me in a way that I don't see myself being is to just remember that I know myself best, and that distorted mirrors are not something good to look into to get any sense of the reality of yourself. So just maintaining that sense of self, even when someone is reflecting back to you something about you that you know is not to be true. It's hard, but it's doable.
It's worth it. And get exercise. The other thing is, take walks if you can, jump up and down in place, do anything. Endorphins are natural tranquilizers. Exercise is a healthy addiction.
You can't get the real tranquilizers. We're going to have to do it the old fashioned way.
And it's all over the net. There's every kind of yoga, Pilates, Zumba, anything you want. Get there and jump up and down.
Well, thank you so much for listening. Our podcast is made possible by Democracy at Work. Again, we ask if you can to support the project at patreon.com/capitalism hits home, or you can visit us at democracyatwork.info. And if you can't support us financially, just spread the word. That helps us as well. Our Twitter handle is Democracy at Work without the O, WRK. We're on Instagram there too. Harriet's website is harrietfraad.com, HARRIETFRAAD.com. And I am Juliana Forlano on Twitter. I look forward to hearing from you there, hearing your feedback. Final thoughts, Harriet?
Please connect, and please come back, and please let us know what you think, because this is for you, and we want to connect with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.